I'm Cadence Debuse, and this is Busybody Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my original co-host from season 1, Francesca Paparone. Although today we will be less silly. Francesca's here to talk to us about all kinds of very interesting things. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm Francesca, which you know, Francesca Paparone. I'm an LCSW, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of New York. I work in private practice with a group practice called Forward Therapy Group. We have 6 clinicians in total, and everyone kind of has like different specialties, but they all in some way intersect with substance abuse. I primarily work with individuals who are like substance use disorder primary. So like they're either in remission and they have like long-term kind of recovery, or they're in the beginning phases, or they're just in the process of like, hey, I want to look at my relationship with substances and kind of want like a helping hand in doing so. Or it's working with family members, like loved ones of substance abusers. So like spouses, adult children, siblings, things like that. And I mean, most of my career has been like substance abuse related. I've worked in residential treatment programs, outpatient programs, sober livings, coaching, companioning companies, which are like, I guess, newer in the world of this. In the last, I would say like 10 years, they've kind of like exploded. But at my core, I am a clinician. So this is my niche and my area of practice.
Well, I wanted to have you on because I remember when we were working together, I don't want to say that was like the first time, but I feel like you were the one who really brought to my mind it's called Narcan. Good. I was like looking it up. There's a few different technical terms. So I definitely want to talk about that. But even just listening to you, I just want to ask you, have you read Gabor Mate's book about addiction, Hungry Ghost?
No, but now I feel like I should.
I'm just reading his most current book right now called The Myth of Normal. But he writes all about trauma and just kind of how our circumstances and environment affect our mental health and our physical health. The other book that I read of his is called When the Body Says No, and it's just about disease. But he really did a lot to destigmatize addiction as like coming from a place of childhood trauma and things in your environment. So I don't know.
Very cool. I'm gonna write that down. I need to check it out. I mean, one of the nonprofits that my husband's like a junior board member of, and we've done like a bunch of their different events, is this organization called Shatterproof. And their whole thing is like end the stigma and like recover out loud and try to like give people the opportunity to talk about their experiences. And what they've really done as an organization is lobby for Narcan, as we were talking about before, to be over the counter and be something that you don't need a prescription for. There's a few states at this point that it's like entirely free. I've picked it up myself many times. I typically try to carry it with me, and I guess I'll give you a little spiel.
Yeah, let the people know what Narcan is if they don't know.
Yes. So Narcan, also referred to as naloxone, is an opioid antagonist. So what that kind of means is it is basically an overdose reversal drug. And so what happens is if someone is experiencing an opioid-induced overdose, which you can tell if someone is unconscious, their lips are blue, sometimes you'll like see drugs around them, which is hard to tell if that's what's happening. These days, it's a nasal spray, which is very cool.
Wow.
It used to actually be more along the lines of like an EpiPen type of vibe, where it was like a large needle, which I think was a big deterrent from like random people feeling comfortable using it. Sure. Over the years, they've now been able to make it this like I should have had one in my hand, a very handy dandy nasal spray. And so basically like you can get trained in Narcan in like 10 minutes. There's YouTube videos to watch. You can go into any pharmacy and ask for it. I will say they do provide some looks sometimes, which like isn't super cool. If you're asking for Narcan, there's sometimes like an eyebrow raise here and there.
But you can do that in New York State. You can just walk into.
Oh yeah, you could walk into any Rite Aid, any Duane Reade, any pharmacy. They carry Narcan, and I've been able to pick it up through my insurance and with like no copay, which is pretty cool. You don't need a prescription called in. They just keep it behind the counter. And the kind of cool thing about Narcan is, if you were to stumble upon someone who is unconscious and there's a suspicion that like drugs are involved or like a family member, loved one, whatever it is, even if they're not using opioids, there's no harm in trying Narcan on them.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's only effective for opiates because as an opioid antagonist, what it does is it basically like binds to the receptors in your brain that receive opioids. And so basically like it's not harmful if you're on some other substance and you use it, it just won't work.
Right. And it's not, I think there's this idea that it's like adrenaline or something, like you're not pumping someone with a different drug.
No. The only reason, and it's interesting, people tend to think that there is some like, as I related to the EpiPen, some like adrenaline similar thing. Because if you've ever seen someone who is experiencing an opioid overdose receive Narcan, their reaction is quite intense. And the reason that is because as soon as you Narcan someone, they're like immediately brought back to life, right? So they're like very confused, very disoriented. The other part is they immediately get thrown into what we call precipitated withdrawal. So they immediately feel like the sickest they've ever felt their whole lives. And so they kind of just went from having this like extremely euphoric high,
right,
to the point that it like made them unconscious, to now being like in total and complete withdrawal. And they're very confused, very disoriented. So part of the process of training people in Narcan is once you deliver Narcan to someone, to take like some good steps back.
Sure.
Because they might wake up and be really disoriented and fearful.
Aggressive.
Yes. Yeah. And aggressive because they're scared. But it's a miracle drug. It has like saved so many people's lives. And, there's a lot of, I would say Narcan tends to be a very polarizing conversation. People love to like compare it to, this idea that drug addicts are this very stigmatized group in this country. And so people are like, why should Narcan be free if insulin isn't free? And it's like this whole kind of thing about like which groups of people with these terminal medical diagnoses are more like worthy. And one of the arguments that makes the most sense to me is that Narcan is typically used, in a drug addict's life, like a couple times, if they are an opiate user, if they're someone who experiences overdoses. And the idea is like, once someone is Narcan, okay, now they have like the opportunity to like live. It's not like a daily medication. It by anything, I mean, it really doesn't cost that much either to be produced. And the idea is like, we've now seen in the last, and I'm going to botch these numbers terribly, so bear with me, but it's like in the last decade or something, the leading cause of death for, I think it's like age 18 to 27.
Yeah, it's very young.
Yeah, is opioid deaths. It's more than car accidents. It's more than other illnesses. Like that is the one that is taking people out rapidly. So I think it's super amazing that we live in a state that's like willing to give it out. There's a program in the Lower East Side called the Lower East Side Harm Reduction Program, where you can like show up at any time and do a training for like 15 minutes, so cool. And you leave with like your whole little kit that comes with your Narcan. It also comes with like a barrier to do like CPR, breaths and things like that. And just like super cool that we live in a place that's like so available. But But it's interesting. I remember you and I used to talk a lot about the idea that like certain drugs are safer and there's like societally things that people do that everyone kind of is like, that makes sense. And one of them that we used to talk about a lot was the like Xanax and alcohol crew.
Yes. Yes.
And how and how people don't necessarily understand like the dangers of missing these things or mixing them because, from an outside perspective, they just seem rather like innocuous, right? Like you can be prescribed a benzodiazepine, which is, your Xanax, your Valium, your Klonopin, by your doctor. And it's like a couple glasses of wine. Like people don't really think anything of it.
Yeah. Which is also a nervous system depressant.
Totally.
So.
I mean, it's really, really wild that it's like not talked about more because they're two major depressants when mixed together. The effects of both are just so much greater. And it is, especially I would say for younger people too, and there's like not as much of an understanding of like what these substances are. Like they also lead to people dying, your respiratory depression, you just eventually stop breathing.
Yeah.
And
let me side note on that. I feel like because I talk about this all the time in my Start Pilates class when we just basically do an anatomy lesson. I think a lot of people don't understand that literally we breathe because we get a signal from our brain. Our lungs are different than our heart. Our heart just like pumps on its own. It's like a little engine. If you're lucky enough to die literally from old age, which is essentially kind of organ failure, the heart will just kind of run down like a clock. It just will it will tire and it will stop. Our lungs get a signal from our brain every time to breathe, which means it can be interrupted. So sometimes like it happens, soccer players will hit their heads, they'll crash their heads into each other on the soccer field and need immediate mouth to mouth. Like they stop breathing because the brain got interrupted. There was like that's like a way that some athletes die. So when you're taking a drug that's like literally a depressant and then you're drinking alcohol, which depresses the nervous system, part of alcohol poisoning is that it has slowed the nervous system enough that your nervous system is no longer sending signals, including to breathe. And so somebody you think they're asleep on the couch and they've died. And they're not going to choke. I mean, that's the thing. They're not going to be like, they're just going to just stop. Which is terrifying.
I know, it's like almost like the deepest of sleeps.
Exactly.
The sleep that never ends. And I think that there's just like so little education given with these drugs when they're prescribed, especially too, it's, this idea that, you go to especially if it's your primary care doctor and not your psychiatrist, and you're like, I'm anxious. Right. I can't sleep. There's very little like behavioral intervention done prior to prescriptions being made. And I feel like something that probably speaks to you really largely too is like this idea of, and I think people are coming around to this, that there are ways to manage your anxiety, manage sleep without the use of medications, right? Yeah. Like everyone's super into like cold plunging now and like dopamine and whatever, but it's, right. For tale as old as time, when I was in school, we used to always talk about different skills people could use during like high anxiety moments or panic attacks or things like that. And like the number one thing is cold exposure. I tell my clients all the time, like if you're in, it even works in like kind of different places, but the idea is if you are in like an elevated state and you're in distress and, the physical kind of manifestation of your anxiety is like the sweaty palms, the racing heart, the inability to kind of like get words out. There's box breathing, which people can use, but also anything cold. So like keep an ice pack in your freezer and kind of exposing it to your chest and activating your vagus nerve and allows your body to organically calm itself. And I'll tell clients like, they'll say, I'm going on a first date and like I was out in this bar and I was like so anxious and I'm like, okay, go to the bar, get a cup of ice water, go to the bathroom, like roll it on your chest, focus on your breathing, like take a few moments. And realistically, you know, that will calm you.
Yeah.
Is it the same as a benzodiazepine? No. But is it something that you can use in day-to-day life without like constantly needing to medicate? Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think the other thing that people go into is these cycles where they're like taking various things to calm the nervous system, and then they're like drinking the caffeine to pop back up. And it's like this like up and down and up and down. And my concern always is like, you don't even know where you are anymore. Like when was the last time essentially that you were sober? Like I keep this off Instagram as much as I can because I really have like a thing about caffeine. And I drink caffeine, but I think it's straight up. I mean, it is a drug. It's a super powerful drug and everyone is addicted to it. And it's like this, I want to have this journalist on who wrote a whole thing about just that it's like this very accepted addiction that we have in the kind of post-industrial age, because it's about production and it's about focus, and caffeine helps you literally check things off of a task or like be on the assembly line. And we've just created our whole lives around this kind of like be productive on the assembly line. Whereas a non-caffeinated brain, it's proven literally is more diffused. It's more creative. It's better at thinking of new ideas, being inspired, and also collaborating with people. So, you know, depending on what field you're in, if you're like a comedy writer or something, it might be better to not be caffeinated and like allow that flow. And I've experimented with that myself, just like literally choosing, how do I want to feel today? Like, what am I doing today? And how do I want to like kind of enhance that if I'm going to, because I'm just like, you drink that caffeine, you watch people just go from like, you know, chill to like amped, you know? And
it really is. It really is. It's interesting too, because it's, you know, we live in New York City, right? And there is this idea that we are supposed to be grinding, productive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like rest us for the week. And I find that extends itself to people who are prescribed stimulants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Adderall, Vyvanse, those things, which of course, you know, and I'll say this too, all medications, you might be a person who really needs them. I'm like a full supporter of people getting like properly evaluated by psychiatrists and then being on the correct medications for them.
Same.
But abuse of stimulants is very similarly to like the abuse of caffeine, where when people, it's almost like trying to just like keep up with the rat race and how productive can we be? And sleep is not important because we need to like get things done and get them through. But it's so interesting you say that about like perhaps like comedy writers and caffeine, where I've heard a lot of people who have used stimulants say that they are the least creative they've ever been. Like they'll be able to clean behind their TV
exactly
have before. But
exactly, it's a narrowing. It allows you to hyper focus. I mean, that's the coke addict, right? Like they're just like talking. They've got all these ideas, like they're going to plan this whole thing. That's like, if you want to get super amped, you can just like dial down on something and just be like obsessed, basically. That's not the same thing as collaborating, spitballing, like allowing for inspiration. And yeah, cleaning my whole apartment and like folding all my clothes is not the same brain I'm using when I'm just like, what do I want to write in a newsletter? Like blah, blah, blah. That is a softer, more receptive place. I think also to your point about how when people get prescribed things specifically by their doctors and not a psychiatrist, and there's no conversation around like, what other things are you trying? Especially if they're getting like the downers and they're not being asked like, oh, also, do you drink every night? Because, you know, I would prefer that you didn't if you're going to take these. Similarly, someone getting prescribed anything that's an upper of some kind, asking them if they drink a lot of caffeine, what their daily life is like. And I would also say if someone is getting prescribed anxiety medication, because I often am like, if you are someone that is at a place where you need to be medicated for anxiety. You're like regularly having panic attacks. You're having trouble just functioning. If you're drinking caffeine at the same time, like what is happening? Like that, you're going in two directions at once. You're literally taking something, you're drinking something that the response of it is to dilate blood vessels, increase heart rate. It literally is mimicking panic, anxiety. That's the point of it. Narrowing the brain into this like obsessive place. It's everything you're trying to free yourself from. And then on top of that, you're like, oh, I'll just take this Xanax. It's like, oh my God, that's exhausting. My nervous system is exhausted imagining that.
It is. It's so funny too, because it's like, I'm even guilty of that. We're like,
For sure.
I'll wake up late. So like I'm running around. I'm not taking like a single moment to like perhaps have like a sip of water. Just like barreling through my day. I've slammed like 2 cortados. It's like 12:30 and I haven't eaten. And I'm like, I think I'm going to die. Like, I'm like, something isn't right here. I'm sweating. My heart is racing. I'm like re-examining every conversation I've ever had since like 7th grade. And I'm like, there's something wrong here. And then I'm like, wait, what? I know what's wrong here. It is the insane amount of caffeine that is pulsing through my body with no water, no food, no moment of like reflection at all. And my clients do it all the time too. They're like, I'm having a really hard day. And I am so like a back to basics type of therapist. I'm like, have we slept? Did we eat? Have we had any water? Have you seen the sun? Like very bare minimum of the hierarchy of needs. And then when they're like, well, I didn't eat today. And, you know, I had a couple coffees and I'm working from home and my office doesn't have a window. So, and I'm like, okay, we gotta go back in time.
Yeah. I mean, I think we live in a society that's so, you know, kind of consumer based. What's the next thing you can buy, whatever, to like change your life? And these real basics. I mean, I used to have a friend in college who was like, if you're upset, drink a liter of water, have a snack and take a nap. And I like still think about that because it's like, I've had clients walk in. I always ask people when I first see them, you probably remember this. I say, how's your body today? I've had literally people pause with that question, burst into tears and go, I don't think I've eaten since like 11 this morning. And I'm seeing them at like 6:30 at night. And I'm like, this was, you know, in the before times, I'd be like, oh my God, there's a bodega on the corner. Do you want to go get a snack? And like, I'm here. I'm fine. Why don't you go get a snack?
Yes.
And then they're like so much better. They're like, oh my God, they're just sitting there eating, having some water. It's just crazy. I had another client, she's put a testimonial out for me a couple of times. When I first saw her, we literally did food talk, my Nourish sessions. And she was having panic attacks. Well, she thought she was having panic attacks. And she was taking Xanax regularly. She would get on the subway and, you know, get flushed, get nauseous, and interpret that and like feel really panicked. So she was interpreting that as an anxiety attack, you know, talk to her doctor. Of course, they didn't ask her what she was eating, when she was eating, what's her schedule like. So we did like a little food diary. What's your daily life? She had to get up super early to commute. So she was like, basically, she would just run out the door at like 5 a.m. The first time she would eat would be around noon. After her first break, she'd be on the subway. The next time she would eat was like 5-ish or something. And I was like, are you starving? Like, I think you're so hungry, because she was really active. So we got her eating on a schedule. It all went away off the medication, you know? And like, to this day, she's like, you know, life-changing.
Yeah, she's like, Cadence, my savior, who reminded me to eat food.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like it's the missing piece that happens all the time.
I know. It really is. And you actually brought up another point too, that I think a lot of people don't realize with some of these medications like Xanax, Klonopin, Valium, all those. You can't just like go cold turkey off of those. And doctors don't explain that. And truthfully, like there are 2 substances that withdrawals from can actually kill you. And the 2 substances are alcohol and benzodiazepines, because they both lead to seizures. I've seen it happen in front of my eyes. It's a terrifying experience. And truthfully, a lot of doctors who maybe should not necessarily be prescribing benzos don't always drive that point home hard enough for their clients. So, and the thing is this doesn't need to be someone who's like abusing the medication. This can be someone who has a prescription for Klonopin, right? And they take like a small amount every day, and maybe it's a PRN. So sometimes they can take it twice a day. And let's say they do this for an extended period of time, have it be a month, 6 weeks. If let's say they go on vacation, they don't bring their medication,
right?
They are very susceptible to a seizure because your body gets so used to that medication that the only way to like properly do it is to like taper down off the meds. But because we look at these as like such safe medications, people don't even really think of that too.
Oh,
and that's the scariest part is they're just like, we're good. And then they have a seizure and they're like, what happened?
Right. And I mean, full disclosure, I've definitely taken Xanax. I've had prescriptions. I'm someone who has historically a terrible insomnia. And so at various times, like Xanax has been really helpful. Mm-hmm. But also I would say the majority of times that I've had Xanax or other kind of like downers of whatever kind, I can't remember the name of the drug, but it was some other kind of supposedly very gentle thing also to help me sleep. I've bummed them off people. Mm-hmm. Like that, I think, because so many people take those kinds of things that I've been complaining, oh my God, I just haven't slept all week. And a friend or family member has been like, oh, I have Xanax. They're just like little 0.5 milligrams. Like, here, just take a couple. And I'm like, oh, thanks so much. And it's like, that's also, I mean, that's just hilarious. Like, that's hilarious, you know?
It happens to me on planes.
Yeah.
Like, where I'll be on like a long flight and my like buddy in the seat next to me is like, you want some? And I'm like, who is this complete stranger offering me pharmaceuticals? And at another point in my life, I'd probably be like, thank you so much. But it is, we have made it so casual to share those types of medications where people are like, you need an Ambien? Take 4.
Right.
Oh, you need a Xanax? Take 2. And it's like, we treat them like over the counter Tylenol at this point.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I've had clients who are like, oh, I don't eat dairy. I don't eat sugar, but to relax at night, I just have like a martini and 2 Klonopin. And I'm like, oh, so then at night we play Russian roulette with our brainstem.
It is a wild thing. The things we pick and choose as human beings.
Yeah.
Which ones we want to, which parts of ourselves we want to like invest in and which ones we're like, not today.
Especially given with all the legalizing weed and it's like, find a drug that's like actually pretty hard to kill yourself with. Meanwhile, everyone's like, want some Ambien? Have half a bottle of wine with it. Works much better.
It is. That's a very, very good point. It's like, yeah, you don't really have to do that anymore. That is the thing though, that's so interesting, even with like, cannabis being legalized in New York and all of that. Like, I mean, I'll share it on the platform. As you know, I'm sober, so I don't partake in any of these things, but I have so many people in my life who are like, they're like, Francesca, it's not the weed we used to know. They're like, it's much more intensive. People are using, oh God, this makes me feel so old that I can't even remember the name of this. What is it called? It's like wax, cannabis wax, pens, oils, whatever it is. It's just not like the old days of like smoking a little bowl. It's like science experiments. And I think it's cool because some of it is like, this will help you with sleep. This will help you with appetite if you need it, like whatever. But then, as we love to do in this country, we love to take everything to like the wildest extreme. Yeah. And I have had clients who have experienced like full-blown psychosis.
For sure.
From cannabis. Like, and I'm like, what? I'm like, I don't remember that ever happening back in the day. But it's just so much more potent in different ways. But then again, it's cool that it's regulated. It's cool that there's people who are like, this strain will make you have like a lucid dream. Like, that's cool, I guess.
I wish, I mean, this is also just making me feel like I just wish with everything, this is my constant wish, that we had more invitation to just like better understand ourselves. I think there's so many kind of assumptions. I've literally had clients kind of say almost with shame that they can't smoke pot anymore because it makes them really paranoid or whatever. And I'm like, why do we have this idea that like, if you're like cool, you can just smoke pot? And like, whereas like, my like full disclosure, my boyfriend is like definitely very into pot, and also his dad grows weed. We call it dad weed. It's literally dad weed. And it's like the weed that you're talking about. It's old. It's like very chill. It's also the only weed I can ever smoke. And I'm so sensitive, and I can only do it like one or two puffs and then I fall asleep basically. If I smoke anything else, I get dizzy, I get nauseous. If I even have gummies, I wake up with the spins. It's like, I'm a very sensitive body. I've had a half a gummy and I wake up with a spin. That's it. I don't do edibles ever again. Like someone else, like someone who's just, has more of an understanding of how these things affect their bodies. They can like experiment in different ways. I've never, 2020 is when I started smoking pot. I like literally I've never done any kind of drugs ever in my life.
You're like, now's the time.
Now's the time. So, I think like we don't like, just with all this stuff, it's like there's not enough information about how all these things can affect you. Like whether it's alcohol, whether it's a Xanax, whether it's weed, whether it's caffeine, we just assume that you should be able to take in or have any of these things kind of as prescribed. Like wine should relax you. Sometimes wine makes me really depressed. I hardly ever drink wine. It affects me very differently than other alcohol. I have to be in the right mood and the right company, or else I get like weird and emotional. Like different alcohols do different things. Tequila is like a real upper. I don't drink tequila anymore. This is like a weird side fact. I just found that if I drink even a sip, I don't sleep. That's it. And I like did an experiment. I'm awesome at making margaritas. And last summer I made margaritas for some people. It was like 4 p.m. I was like, I'm going to have a tiny sip. Didn't sleep that night. And I was like, I'm done. Goodbye, tequila. I love a margarita, but it's not worth it.
You did your experiment. You got the data you needed.
All the other times I thought I was like, oh, I guess I was just like amped from hanging with those people. No, all these substances can affect people really, really differently, including a pharmaceutical, including something that gets prescribed to you,
Yeah, we're very, like healthcare in this country is like, you have this ailment, this is the one solution we have. So like especially with psych meds in general, I always say, like psychiatrists can only go off of like self-report, right? Like with other ailments with a person, let's say you have like an infection and a doctor prescribes you, antibiotics and steroids. They can then be like, let's look at the infection. And they're
exactly.
Like, cool, we are no longer infected. With psychiatry, you basically are like, so I gave you that pill 3 weeks ago. How's your brain doing? And it's so self-report that people are like, I think okay. And they're like, okay, so what does okay mean? And they're like, right. I cried 3 times instead of 4 times. And it's like, oh shit, that's your version of okay.
Yeah.
Like it is really, really just like by the individual. And it's figuring out like people's baselines are so different too. I mean, but I think you're right. I think there needs to be space to be able to like talk about substances and gather data and experiment with things in a safe space that like can provide insight. I mean, my practice does a lot of like abstinent-based work, but also a lot of like harm reduction.
Yeah.
Or people who are like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm finding that I need 4 glasses of wine every night at 6 p.m. and it's freaking me out a little. And I think that's something new too. It's like this very old school kind of archaic model was like, if someone wanted to get into therapy or treatment or whatever it may be for a substance abuse disorder, the outcome was always like abstinence. Like it was like, if you have a drinking problem, you'll never drink again. If you have a drug problem, you'll never do any substances again, And now I think that the, mental health sector has been able to adjust and say, someone who might have a bit of like a reliance on Xanax can safely use cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
or someone who has trouble, limiting their alcohol intake can, safely drink a beer on a Sunday and not then drink hard liquor. Like, we've had to get more creative with patients and just like this. And also too, in the opioid epidemic, it's like, you want the barrier to entry to be as low as possible for people to get off of it. So if someone comes to you and they're like, I use OxyContin, or, at this point in time, it's like fentanyl, which is terrifying. And I don't want to do that anymore, but I'm not interested in like going to 12-step meetings, and I'm not interested in like full-blown recovery. It's so important to be like, okay, what do you think would work? Is it that you want to try smoking cannabis? Is it that you want to be able to have 2 glasses of wine? Like, let's talk about what that would look like. Let's try to give you space to explore that, gather data, and then go from there.
That immediately made me think of, I have plenty of sober clients and friends and family members and stuff. And a lot of ex-heroin addicts are big smokers. And it's like, I'm just like, great, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like,
very
do that. Just do that instead. That seems great. You're not in a scary alley trying to get that. You're like not going to die of an overdose in your apartment alone. Like, I get it. And I think we do live in there's still just like such puritanism in our culture of just like, basically also anything that gives pleasure, back to kind of our caffeine thing, anything that relaxes you, anything where you're just like not quote unquote productive constantly must be bad. And so someone who feels that they kind of need something more regularly to help them regulate or stay calm or whatever, it's like some kind of failure. And I just think like, I don't know, that's when I love being in Europe. And I'm like, look how people just like have a glass of wine in the middle of the day. And look how people just like have a pastry when they want a pastry. And it's just like, and also they have time off and they have like government support for vacation times and like things like that.
There's 6-week vacations. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I think also just like this idea that everything is everyone's fault, like their own, like kind of what you're talking about is someone's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm finding that I'm needing all this, something extra like this, like 4 glasses of wine every night. It's very self-focused, like there's something wrong with me. And you're talking about really giving them an invitation to be like, well, what else is happening in your life? Like, let's talk about the bigger picture here. It's not a personal failing. It's not that you need to be more disciplined, but like, what else can we do to offset whatever stress is happening in a more, supportive way, and hopefully change those factors instead of just like, yeah, you should be able to work 80 hours a week and get no time off and not be sleeping and just relax every night, just on your own. Just take a couple deep breaths.
It is crazy. It's also the pandemic too. Like, the amount of people who came out of the pandemic and are like, I think I have a drinking problem.
Yeah.
Is huge. I think it's like the isolation, the, working from home, happy hour or whatever it is, gets a little bit earlier in the day. I had clients come in who are like, I have never once felt like I had any problematic relationship with alcohol. And now I'm finding that I'm starting to drink at noon 5 days a week. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, let's talk about that. How did we get here? And it oftentimes is that, the substances are like an escape of sorts.
For sure.
And like we were saying, like, yeah, I'm sure you're stressed. You're in, especially, the isolation is so bad for people. I could talk about that for like 2 hours. I'm telling you, I'll see my clients and I'm like, when is the last time you like went outside?
Yeah.
Like the working from home is so bad for them because, especially too, I see a lot of my clients on telehealth. So even for me, I'm like, I'm seeing you right now. When has anyone else seen you? Not on a computer screen. Like, when are you walking outside? How many like steps are you getting in? If it's just like, and here our apartments are like shoe boxes. We do laps, it's not great.
Yeah. I think the not getting outside and just having other interactions also just, that's how we build resiliency, is just like, you're out in the world, even if it's just like you did your laundry on the corner and there was like a lady who yelled at you. And then that was like a thing you experienced. And then you go home, you like It was like a whole thing. Otherwise, you're just in your house with all these screens and all this kind of pressure to keep doing stuff and alerts and emails and people needing things from you. And that would wear anyone's mental health down. I think like the isolation and also just being this kind of tunnel vision that we get stuck in when we don't literally interrupt ourselves, which actually kind of makes me think of the cold therapy thing. I always think about that as like, you're just interrupting the state that you're in. And I think people, when they're in anxiety or in depression, it feels so much like this is just who I am. It's impossible to escape this, but it's chemicals. Like we are just chemicals flowing up and down our body all the time. Those chemicals are very much reliant on the environment that we're in and the whatever influences we're taking in, who you're relating to. And if you just interrupt that state, it's amazing how quickly it changes. A cold shower, doing a bunch of jumping jacks till you're like, like no one wants to do that. But if you're like freaking out and you just start doing jumping jacks, your body will just shift into a different state. And then you'll be like, oh, I feel different now.
Yeah. There's a saying that they use. It's like it's a recovery based saying, but it's like move a muscle, change a thought. Like it's very hard to think yourself out of bad thinking, right? When you have like the intrusive thoughts and like the, some of the shame-based stuff, or even like the over-examining of like parts of yourself that you're not happy with. It's very hard to sit there and be like, we're not going to think about this anymore.
Right.
And so the idea is to like put yourself in some level of movement. Because as you said, that is an interrupter, and like some type of movement will involve some level of stimulation that's outside of like all the kind of noise in your brain that you're trying to turn on.
Yeah. I mean, I literally teach anti-anxiety cardio class in the summer for that purpose.
Fantastic.
And I mean, that's the only reason to do cardio. That and organ health is really like, it's super good for your organs and your digestion. And it's like proven so good for your brain, like just elevates people's moods. There's a famous psychiatrist, Daniel Siegel, who's like written a bunch and he does a lot about family therapy. He prescribes teenagers 20 minutes of cardio activity every day just to help regulate their hormones and their moods and all that kind of stuff, especially when families are really struggling. So, but even beyond that, I was thinking like during the pandemic, I did so much baking and cooking because like having all that anxiety, it was like, let me focus on this task, like anything that kind of redirects your brain. I often tell people doing balancing exercises, like just try and stand on one foot, or like give yourself a funny little thing where you're trying to stand on like a block or like juggle with one hand. And, your brain will just shift off that, railroad track where you can't stop thinking about something and just try to do another task, and give yourself some relief there.
Yeah, these are all like skills for regulation. And it's interesting. You even said like this idea of being indoors all the time or isolated, which made me think about, when people are constantly kind of reaching for something externally, like when they're anxious for a Xanax or whatever, or, when they're tired for caffeine, you basically are preventing yourself from creating like distress tolerance, right? So like if every feeling that we have that's uncomfortable, have it be like fatigue, anxiety, inability to focus, whatever it is, and we're like, we need this thing to kind of fill it, we're like robbing ourselves of the opportunity to learn our own like skills in that. And especially with anxiety and benzodiazepines is, the more that you like immediately have that moment of like, I feel anxious now, I'm going to take this medication, or I can't sleep, I'm going to take this medication. You're ultimately making it harder and harder as you go along. Like there is going to be a dependence to it, and you're not allowing yourself to build any of the distress tolerance that we need as human beings. We need to be able to tolerate uncomfortable feelings. We need to be able to, it's the same thing with like stress, right? If we're constantly like drinking wine because we're stressed, we're not actually learning how to do anything with this stress or like alleviate it. We're basically just like band-aiding it.
100%. 100%. I always say stress is like a solid object. You can't make it go away. You do something with it. You're like holding it. You can watch a movie with it. You can drink wine with it. You can take a bath with it. You can go for a run with it. But like, you don't like bat it away. Like it's part of our lives. And it's really just like, how do you want to hold that? Do you want to just like, keep it hidden and like freak out about it constantly, or just be like, look at this, I can hold it in one hand and do these other things. And that's literally, cold plunging is about stress tolerance for your nervous system. It's apparently proven that like you go in, obviously your body goes into a kind of shock, and then you breathe and you're like, and I don't do like, the, whatever that guy's thing is, the whole thing where he like breathes a whole bunch of whatever that guy. But just like literally just doing it, you have to regulate, right? You're in there, you're like screaming, and then you kind of calm down. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Like, that's what's so crazy about it. That's literally how our body works. And yeah, you're right. If you're just always reaching for something to immediately not feel that thing, you're never building the ability to just stick with that thing. I often, as a lifelong insomniac, I'm often telling people, you can do stuff tired. Like, that's okay. It feels terrible to not sleep and then jack yourself on coffee all day. It feels horrible. You know, it's possible. Writing emails tired. You can just be like a little sleepy.
It's a very good point. It is a very, very good point. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. We're in such this, like, I mean, I last night was not a good night of sleep for me at all. And I woke up and was like, oh no, I'm going to sound so stupid on this podcast because when I'm tired, I can't think of words. And truth be told, I'm very tired and I've thought of some words. So.
100%. I don't notice that at all. I think maybe your brain was doing the nice expansive thing. It's a good brain for conversation.
There you go. That's true. That's true. I'm so tired that I'm like just sharing everything I've ever heard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so people can get Narcan in New York State.
You can get it at any pharmacy around the country, but some states require a prescription, but New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, tri-state, do not require a prescription.
My last question before we end is, have you ever used it on somebody?
I have used it on someone. In a situation with like a previous job of mine. And I'll say this, the beauty of it is it's so self-explanatory. It literally looks like an Afrin nasal spray. You really can't mess it up. You just have to kind of be like, okay, in one nose, you're actually supposed to do both nostrils. You do like one first, then the other. And it worked and it saved this person's life.
Wow.
And it is a fantastic, fantastic thing to have. Even if you're, I say it to people who have family members who struggle with substance abuse issues, good to have. Or if like you are a New Yorker who believes in like community and like taking care of one another.
Yeah.
Do I understand that it would probably be terrifying to like Narcan a complete stranger? Sure. If you are someone who believes that might be something that they want to like be able to do if they need to, go get Narcan.
And I was just thinking, like, if you have a job, if you're a bartender, you work at a music venue, you're someone who goes to music shows a lot, like things where people might be using drugs, especially people who might not be very experienced. And so there might be a higher incidence of overdoses and things like that. Like that seems like a no-brainer to have that with you.
Totally. I think it should be in most establishments. I mean, overdose deaths in New York happen in bathrooms most of the time. Because we are not a city that provides a lot of like private spaces for drug use. So yeah, I encourage everyone to get Narcan. I can send you to Cadence a link for like instructional video. It's like a short, like 3-minute YouTube clip that some university put out. That's like a very clear kind of like, this is how you use Narcan.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much, Francesca.
I know. I'm. Thank you for having me. This was very cool. Glad we got to chat and spend some time.
Thanks for sharing all this important information, and I hope we'll have you back and talk about more things because clearly there's a lot here, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to. Maybe next time I come, maybe we can be like silly.
I know, it's like, the OG co-host where we were just silly.
Yeah, simply silly. Simply Silly was a great time for us. But there's important things to discuss, so it had to be done. So, well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad we got to chat, and we will talk soon, okay?
Okay, absolutely.
Bye, take care.